Hello again, this is Dan back with another Book of the Week review. This week we're reviewing the title Spin Selling by Neil Rackham, which is one of my very favourite sales and business books and one that I highly recommend checking out if you're a professional salesperson or in business for yourself, or really if you have anything to do with customers at any point in your career. This book was written back in 1988 and was based on a study that Neil Rackham and his team did and covering 35,000 salespeople, observing them in action, interviewing them, and then collecting data about their success as professional salespeople out there in the field. And what he uncovered was a lot of counterintuitive ideas and things that you wouldn't expect in sales. The main focus of this book is around the idea of major sales. Now, major sales are different to short-term sales in that you have to maintain a relationship with the customer over the long term. You can't basically go in, sell the customer, take their money and walk away. You can't pressure them or try and hype them into buying something. Usually it takes several, sometimes many sales calls or visits or interviews to actually have someone accept your product or service and to buy it. Also, you'll find that very often there's more than one person involved in a major sale. There might be a buying committee, or the person you're talking to might have to get it approved by a purchasing person or a supervisor or a CEO or something like that. So there's many levels to a major sale, and this book really helps you to understand how to actually start to get through to those levels of people and start to have more success at that higher level of selling. One of the core ideas in the book is the difference between implied needs and explicit needs. Now, when you first go to see a customer, the temptation is to jump in and start telling them all the benefits of your product and trying to start selling them on why they get a great deal out of it. Now, the challenge is that most customers, and most people in fact, aren't really interested in anything you have to say. In fact, they're only interested in their own problems and frustrations. And so if we start with that kind of focus of trying to tell and sell, we end up basically facing objections. So the idea of implied needs versus explicit needs is very important to understand early on, because what happens is a customer usually doesn't have an understanding of the problems that they have in their business. Basically, they have some dissatisfaction or some frustration, and maybe they'll express a little bit of this to you. However, it's not very clear or explicit to them that the long-term consequences of those problems in their business. So really, our goal as salespeople is to move them from having implied needs, small things that they might be frustrated or dissatisfied with, all the way into explicit needs, where they clearly understand what the problem is, how much it's costing them in terms of time, money, frustration, that type of thing. The spin selling process itself covers this acronym SPIN, S-P-I-N. And each of the letters stand for something specific, and they actually help you to start to move through from this implied needs stage all the way to explicit needs with a customer. It's very powerful to understand each of them, so I'm going to go through each in a bit more detail to help you. The S stands for situation. Now, every customer we talk to has a situation that they're dealing with. And basically, we can use small talk or opening lines to get them started talking about their situation. Now, this is great. It's good to get customers talking because they actually start to open up and feel a bit more comfortable with us when they're talking. However, the challenge is if we linger too long in situations, very often this starts to be a drawback and customers get bored. So we have to be careful not to get stuck talking about the situation too long and actually start to move to look for dissatisfactions or frustrations that the customer has. And this leads us to the next stage. The P stands for problem. And this is where we really want to head with the customer. We basically want them to start to express to us the problems that they're having in their business or their life that we think we could potentially solve. Now, remember that they're probably going to be implied problems. They're not going to be specific or clear at this stage. You're probably going to hear the customer talk about frustrations or inconvenience, things that are little setbacks that they're tolerating in their business or their life. Now, this is where you start to understand the implied needs that the person has. And this is where you really start to go into interview mode using specific questions that we're going to talk about in a moment that will help them to actually move from being an implied need to a more explicit type of need. The I stands for implication, and this is where the real magic of the spin model starts to come in. Basically, if we get stuck just talking about the problems that the customer has, you'll find that the customer tends to be resigned to those problems. They tend to be a little bit cynical or just basically think that there's nothing that they can do about the problems. They tend to manage them because problems are a part of everyday life. So the implication part of it is where we start to ask specific questions that uncover the long-term implications of the problems that they have. Now, usually we want to uncover things like cost or time wasted or stress or something like that. Anything that's basically a ripple effect of the small problem that they have at the moment. Now, doing this over time helps the customer to basically start to self-realize what's happening, and the more they're talking about the implications of their problems, the more it's going to become explicit. And this moves us to the next stage. The N stands for need payoff. Now, this isn't where you start spouting benefits to the customer and you start telling them that you can solve all their problems, or you've got a product or a service that's going to take away any frustration. This is a trap that a lot of salespeople fall into. Realistically, what we want to do once a need is actually explicit and the customer understands it, is have the customer then tell you how they think that need can be solved. Basically, we want them to start to think of the solution themselves as best we can, rather than try to pre-package a solution for them. Because you'll find that if buyers are actually involved in the process of solving the problem, and they can somehow align your product or service to that, they're much more inclined to believe that your product or service is the right one for them. This is a really key point of the process, and it's one that a lot of salespeople miss because it's very counterintuitive to continue to ask questions when the customer has already an explicit need. Now, by this stage with a customer, you should have them pretty clear on the needs that they have in their business, and hopefully they've even thought a little bit about how they could solve those needs, potentially through your service or product. And this is a great position to have them in. So this is where we start to talk more about what we can do to help them. And this is where we start to look at the difference between features and benefits, and how we can stop objections by making sure we talk about the right thing. So when we're talking features and benefits with customers, very often there's a tendency to jump in and try and dazzle them with the different features that are very exciting or new or innovative about our product or service. And while this is fun for us, it's interesting and we like talking about what we can do, it's actually not valuable to the customer unless the benefit that you're talking about of your product matches the need that they have. There's no reason for you to bring it up at this point. Now that is very, very counterintuitive to what most sales books will tell you. In fact, most of them will tell you at this stage to lay it on thick in terms of what you can do for the customer and the service you can provide and that type of thing. Instead, in spin selling, we actually focus only on benefits that match the customer's explicit needs. Now by doing this, what we actually do is preempt a lot of objections. Because what they found in the studies that they did was that objections tend to come up when customers are sold features, when they're sold things that don't really have a match to their needs. So there might be some amazing features of a product that are amazing to other people out there in the marketplace, but when it comes to their specific need, those features didn't match their problem. So the customer tends to object, whether it's to price or they need to think about it or something like that. And so by only focusing on benefits, things that actually match the need, you'll find that the objections tend to be less. Now that's a very quick overview of the spin process and some of the key ideas in this book. But as I said, this book is amazing in terms of the depth and detail it goes into, and there's a lot of data to back up the ideas that they're suggesting here. This book has been hugely influential on me as a business person, and there's many, many people out there who will attest to the value of reading this book. Personally, I would recommend getting a copy as soon as you can and reading it over several times, underlining it and reviewing it on a regular basis. If you're in sales or you work in business-to-business type industries, or if you deal with customers at all, spin selling is very highly recommended. It's one of the best books out there to help you improve your customer service and also your sales success. So check it out for yourself when you have some time.